We've got a lot to get to with this great panel. I want to bring in MSNBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian, who's been tracking all of this for us. Also here, MSNBC political analyst and former director of the DOJ's Public Affairs Office, Anthony Coley, is on set with me. And our national security and intel analyst, Michael Feinberg, who recently resigned from the FBI under pressure because of his ties to a Trump critic. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Ken, I'll just start with you really broadly. What are we watching for in today's defense motions?
Good morning, Allie. We expect Comey's lawyers to attack this case on at least two fronts. One, they're going to say that the U.S. Attorney, Lindsay Halligan, is not properly serving in her role because of the Federal Vacancies Act. It's a complicated argument. Essentially, she had a predecessor who was the interim U.S. Attorney who served more than 120 days. And they're going to argue that the clock didn't start again. So the interim U.S. Attorney has exceeded the allowable time under the law, and therefore she's not properly the U.S. Attorney, and therefore the case should go away. The more interesting motion, perhaps, is going to be the way they attack this case on the grounds of selective or vindictive prosecution. And that will just be the opening salvo in that effort, because in order to make that case, they're going to need to get a lot of discovery. They're going to be asking for all the records in this case, all the messages to and from the White House and the U.S. Attorney's Office, all the internal Justice Department communications, to be able to make the case that this prosecution is mainly happening because Donald Trump wants to punish James Comey. Alec.
I want to come back on the discovery front because I think there's potentially some threads there that folks might look ahead to with intrigue. But Anthony, first to you, how do you expect the judge to approach these requests? And honestly, how soon could we get a decision?
Well, prosecution will have about 2 weeks or so to file a response, and then the judge could rule on this by Thanksgiving, give or take. But big picture, Ali, the reason we are in this moment is because of what the president has said, right? Mm-hmm. Presidential words matter. They carry weight. They move markets. And the defense is right to use these words as proof points as to why these charges aren't justified, right? We used to live in a time where presidents didn't comment on criminal matters in the court of public opinion because they were afraid. They respected the court system, and they respected the court of law, right? And that's what's so disturbing about this moment, because we got a president now who doesn't.
But let alone, and I want you to contrast the DOJ that you worked in and this DOJ now. The Merrick Garland Department of Justice, much to the chagrin of some Democrats that I spoke to, really did the work to try to show that they were independent, that they were putting distance between themselves and anything that might be a politically problematic prosecution. That is now out the window and then some. Plus, you've got the president saying, I am the chief law enforcement officer. I mean, as someone who worked at Maine Justice, what is your reaction?
That's not normal. Listen, the real contrast is between what Donald Trump is doing right now and Watergate. Today, and you'll appreciate this because you're a history buff, today is the 52nd anniversary of the Saturday Night Massacre. That was the moment when President Richard Nixon ordered his Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General to fire the special prosecutor who was investigating the break-in of the DNC at the Watergate complex. Those two individuals, they refused and they resigned. Contrast that to what's happening right now, right? You had career prosecutors in this case who followed the facts and the law. And what the DOJ says, these kind of post-Watergate norms, is you don't bring a case unless there is enough evidence to obtain and sustain a conviction. The Trump-appointed U.S. attorney running that office agreed with the prosecutor. Donald Trump fired that guy, and he put in place Lindsay Halligan, right? And so we're in a moment now that's actually worse than Watergate, in my opinion, because the president is putting people in place who are ignoring the facts, who are working around the law, and are putting people in place to enact his political agenda.
Well, I do think on the Lindsay Halligan thread, it's going to end up being important here, Michael, for a number of reasons. Ken, of course, outlined the way that Comey's own team might try to argue that she was unlawfully appointed. That could have key ripple effects, not just here, but for other acting attorneys as well, right? I'm thinking for New Jersey, for example.
Yeah, and there's actually already been a flurry of litigation in New Jersey by criminal defendants arguing that the indictments or complaints against them are not just facially legally valid because this person acting as U.S. attorney is not there legally. And, you know, it's interesting to note when Ken pointed out that there are a number of potential legal restrictions on Halligan serving as U.S. attorney, one of the primary documents outlining why that is the case is actually a Department of Justice memorandum that was written by none other than now Justice Samuel Alito. So if this does go to the Supreme Court, it's going to be very interesting to see whether the majority, which is usually very inclined to agree with an incredibly expansive use of executive authority by this administration, is willing to submit to the very doctrines it created itself decades ago.
It's a very interesting paradox for us to potentially be driving toward here. As we're considering Lindsay Halligan's role, Ken, it's also important for us to look on the other side in the ways that the Department of Justice itself might try to get Comey's lawyer ousted. Explain the way that they're trying to say that there's a conflict of interest here. And frankly, their argument ignores the fact that Comey himself would get to waive that and obviously has.
Of course, Ali. Yeah, they're going to argue that Patrick Fitzgerald, James Comey's lawyer, was involved in an episode where Comey wrote memos about his conversations with Donald Trump and disclosed those memos to his lawyers at the time, which included Patrick Fitzgerald. And the FBI later came back and said that some of that material was classified and asked Pat Fitzgerald to give some of it back, which he did. The issue there is we're not talking about marked classified documents. We're talking about information that was in the head of a former top official. He wrote some of it down. That kind of thing happens all the time. There was nothing improper about what happened there. And it's hard to imagine that this is going to be the basis for disqualifying Pat Fitzgerald, especially when, as you rightly pointed out, James Comey can waive that conflict of interest provision.
Michael, sorry, Ken, to cut you off right there at the end. Michael, I want to go back to another thing that Ken said at the beginning of our time together here. And he was talking about the discovery methods that might happen if this case is not dismissed. And again, he detailed the way that there's basically 3 avenues that Comey's team might work through to try to get this dismissed. If that doesn't happen, what does discovery look like? And might that find a way to ultimately implicate the president and others in DOJ if we're going through the context that he and Lindsay Halligan had? Might they have to do that even if they're arguing she's wrongfully in place in the first place?
Yeah, look, she's the one who presented the indictment to the grand jury. So right. If she was improperly influenced by the White House, or this prosecution is based more on a political revenge list than it is on predicated facts, how she got in front of that grand jury is to a certain extent immaterial for that issue. If there was improper influence by the executive branch, then that influence was improper regardless of how Halligan got to her seat. But it is important to know, while that argument may carry weight with a district court or an appellate court, the Supreme Court, essentially since the presidential immunity decision that cut the legs out of Jack Smith's prosecutions, has really been inclined to not put any constraints or guardrails on executive decision-making whatsoever. So, I think the facts based on settled law very much weigh in Comey and Fitzgerald's favor. I just don't know how much we can rely on settled law when this reaches the Supreme Court.
It's just a really striking thing to hear someone with your background say in this larger moment. I think, Ken, when you talk about the facts of this case, the way that other prosecutors, including the previous person who was in Lindsay Halligan's role, and then Eric Siebert ultimately asked to resign or quitting himself because he didn't think there was enough there to bring these charges in the first place, that sets the backdrop. But then you've got reporting about 2 more prosecutors in this same Eastern District of Virginia who were just laid off. What do we know about that?
Yeah, that's right, Ali. The top criminal prosecutors in the Norfolk office, Elizabeth Usey and Kristen Bird, who were working on the case against the New York Attorney General, that mortgage fraud case that went to an indictment, but reportedly were concerned about the fact that they didn't think that case merited prosecution. They were fired on Friday, summarily fired by Lindsay Halligan. They are career prosecutors with lots of experience. Essentially, that Norfolk office has been decimated now of its senior prosecution ranks. And it's just another example of how if you cross the powers that be in this Justice Department, if you dissent from cases that Donald Trump wants, your job is at risk. And that's something we've never seen before. I can't stress this enough. In the modern history of the Justice Department, it's something that all Americans need to pay close attention to, Ali.
You're nodding your head.
I am. There are really, Ali, and I have a piece today on MSNBC.com about this. There are really two types of federal prosecutors, right? You've got the prosecutors who follow the facts and the law and adhere to the rule of law. That's just a fancy way of saying keeping like cases alike, and then those who don't. And so what Trump is doing, to Ken's point, he's created this patchwork of U.S. attorneys, many in acting capacities in New Jersey, in the Western District of New York, in the Eastern District of Virginia, to do exactly that. Now, their goal necessarily is to not secure a win against Comey and James and others. I think Trump would like a win in the court of law, but Trump really, I think he is focused on the process. The process itself.
And the court of public opinion.
Is the punishment. Yes, in the court of public opinion, right? It takes money to defend yourself against the weight of the force of the U.S. Justice Department. It takes an emotional toll. And I also think he wants to send a very clear message to people inside government and outside government. If you defy me, even if the facts and the law are on your side, you better have some deep pockets and you better gird yourself, because I don't tolerate dissent. I'm going to come after you.